and welcome to M4G Advocacy Media. You're watching the Journey Series video podcast. I'm Mark. I'm the co-host of the Journey Series podcast. I'm a brown man who's bald with a black and white beard. I've got a painting behind me and a shelf with some knickknacks, and I'm wearing a purple shirt. Oh, and I've got brown eyes and glasses.
And I'm Crystal. I have glasses and a pink shirt, and I have a painting behind me and a lamp on a table.
Today we're here with our guest today, rather, is Penny Melville Brown, and she's coming to us from the UK, and she's going to talk to us a bit about disability and her journey, and can have a little chat. Hi, Penny.
Hi there. Hi, Mark. Hi, Crystal. Lovely to see you both, if I could.
Yes, it's great to see you as well. Do you want to go ahead and tell us a bit about your journey and what's brought you to this point in life?
Maybe
Sorry.
she can start with her own description of
Right.
where she is and what she has on.
Yes. Well, let me describe myself then. I'm what people call white, but I'm not really white at all. I'm pink and grey and all sorts of other colours. I've got what used to be brown hair and is still, I think, light brown hair because I've got little creepy bits coming in. I'm wearing a black polo neck, and because I'm blind, I think it's got some colour down the front of it, or it could be food stains. I've no idea, and I don't really care. I'm talking to you now from Hampshire in England, and Hampshire is a county right at the south of the country, just near the Isle of Wight, and I'm about 3 miles away from the island in Fareham. Well, I'm talking to you today from my atrium in Hampshire, and if you can hear it, and you may, if the weather gets any worse, we're here in a spring shower, but it's rather a squall, so just be conscious that there's a glass roof, glass walls around me, and it's all beating down on the windows here. But let me tell you a little bit about my story and how I've come to be here today. Way back, I joined the Navy. I joined the Navy because the man I was due to marry after university had been killed in a car accident just in my last year at university when I was doing a postgraduate course. And I decided I needed to do something completely different. So I went off and I joined in those days, we had the Women's Royal Naval Service. And I joined that as a direct entry graduate. So I did a few months learning about the Navy with all the REN ratings, the other ranks. And then I went off to Dartmouth and I did my officer training and popped out as a probationary third officer RENS, Women's Royal Naval Service. We had little tricorns that we wore on our heads, little blue stripes on our uniform. And my first job was out doing NATO intelligence in Naples, Italy. And then I came back to the UK and actually worked 5 miles away from where I am today, up on Fort Southwark, in a very ancient fort where I was responsible for home defence and war planning. And that was in the days at the end of the Cold War. So it was really important stuff. I went on from there to the Ministry of Defence, where I did public relations for the women's services. So that was the RENS and the Quorns, which is our nursing service. After that, I went on and ran the University Royal Naval Units, which is where we had units in various universities around the country Each one had a fast patrol boat, and we were there to recruit young and undergraduates so they understood something about the Navy. And then I had an amazing opportunity. I was sitting at lunch one day and somebody said to me, what we need is a woman barrister. Barristers are those lawyers that wear the wigs and the big gowns and flounce around in court. And the Navy had never had one in all its history of, hundreds of years, never had a woman doing that job. So I said, well, I can do that. And I went off and did a year of academic law, then a year of bar school where I learned to, wave my gown around and flip my wig about, and then a bit of pupillage. And then I was back in the Navy doing my first legal job, and that was in Portsmouth, which again is 10 miles away from here. And that was going really well. But then my right eye started to have problems. I managed to survive. I was still driving, I was still working, but I managed to get some of my documentation in a bit bigger print. I went down to Plymouth, which is right at the other end of the country, down in the far southwest, and I was the staff legal advisor to the Admiral down there. But that job didn't last long, less than a year, because my right eye was in real difficulty then. So I went to Moorfields Eye Hospital, which is the really famous eye hospital in the UK. And they put me on masses of steroids. I mean, huge, huge amounts. And within a fortnight, I'd blown up like a balloon. And that's my excuse, because I've always been now blown up like a balloon. And I couldn't walk. I could barely breathe. I was really very ill. And my kidneys and my liver were also starting to fail. So I had to make the choice of whether I was going to give up my right eye or die. Well, you can imagine there wasn't a lot of choice to be had, so I gave up my right eye. And I recovered a while. I was still in the Navy, of course, but I went back to work in the Navy. I could still just about drive, but then my left eye started decreasing. And I had to stop driving. I was still working. I was still in uniform. I was lucky enough to get promoted to commander because by that stage, the Women's Royal Naval Service had been combined into the Royal Navy. So I had 3 gold stripes, 3 thick gold stripes on my uniform. I couldn't wear my tricorn anymore as I went around the dockyard, because I was using a white cane and I couldn't see who was saluting me or who I had to salute. So I just wore my hat underneath my arm so people knew I was an officer, but that I wasn't going to require them to do the saluting. But it was pretty clear to me that although I managed to work for another 2, even 3 years in the Navy, that they weren't going to give me the promotion jobs. And they were finding it incredibly difficult to cope with a very obviously disabled person. I was probably the first, officer using a white cane since, wars years and years ago. So I started looking for jobs, and it was extraordinarily difficult, because I was a disabled person. Duh, 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 duh. And employers are rubbish with disabled people. They're so terrified. They're terrified of being embarrassed, of saying the wrong thing, of us posing lots of risk in their workplace, of us not being very good at doing the work, all this rubbish. And I tried the ex-service charities, and they weren't very helpful to me either. So I networked around, and in the end, I decided, on the basis of absolutely no knowledge at all, that I would become a freelance disability consultant. Yes, and I managed to get a contract. And so 2 days after I'd left the Navy, taken my uniform off, I was in my first freelance job earning money. Hurrah!
So,
And then a year later, I set up my business, Disability Dynamics, and I spent the next sort of nearly 20 years helping other disabled people to get through the misery I'd been through and be able to get back to work. I started off doing some of that by doing policy work, consultancy, training, trying to help government organizations, agencies. I did work in the private sector and the voluntary sector. So I was working across all sorts of areas. And I was also doing lots of public appointments too. These are sort of government appointments. Some of them are paid and some of them aren't paid. So for example, I was the chairperson of the War Pensioners Committee for South East England, which is a huge area. And I was responsible for representing the interests of war pensioners, ex-military people who've been injured or made ill by their service. So I was looking after that. I was chair of the Learning and Skills Council for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So we were looking after and funding all the post-16 education in schools and in education colleges, not the universities, but everything that people were doing for vocational or academic training until they were about 19-ish. I was on the board of, I think you have the IRS in America.
yes.
We have HMRC here, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So I was on the board of that organization, and they are responsible for gathering all the tax from all the businesses and individuals in this country. So I did all sorts of things like that, but I was also doing voluntary work. I was working with the Prince's Trust. I became chairman of our local village hall and got the money to refurbish all of that and, you know, just take it from a pretty defunct charity into something that's running now, more than 10, 15 years later and doing really well. But I was helping people to get back to work. And I've just been writing about this, in fact, because I'm just writing my second book, which is about living with disability and all the things that happen to you, and linking it with data and linking it with some of the stories that people have told me over the last, quarter of a century. Makes me feel very old, that. But what I learned was that self-employment is really important as an alternative work route for people with disabilities.
Yes.
Because persuading those wretched employers to take us on, do the application form, ask for reasonable adjustments at the interview, all the rest of it is really difficult. And they are still embarrassed and terrified, and so they don't do very good interviews. So I set up a little organization, which was the Work for Yourself program. And I've managed to find some funding for it. And we did a pilot project in Derbyshire, as I mentioned earlier. And we had really good outcomes. So this was just for 12 months. And at the end of that, of all the disabled people we took on, we had a 40% success rate, which is pretty impressive. Not all of us started businesses, and we couldn't take on masses of people, but we had people starting businesses. We had people deciding that actually they were capable of getting a job, and they did. And we had some others starting vocational training. So that was pretty impressive. And on the strength of that, I got more funding for 2 more projects that lasted another 6 years. And that was, we found these 2 areas in Derbyshire, which isn't about the middle of the country, which had very high levels of deprivation. And I don't know whether this is the same for you on the other side of the pond, but this was all about ex-mining industry areas, because there seems to be legacy problems in those areas. Often these mining areas were little villages where the whole village was devoted pretty much to mining. And so when those mines closed, when they had big strikes, there was a huge ripple through that community as people lost their jobs. They were isolated, they weren't necessarily able to get new jobs, and it impacted onto the families, the children, and it's become quite, multi-generational over the years. Anyway, these areas have this legacy of deprivation, of high levels of disabled people, high levels of unemployment. And that's really where I focused what I was doing. And we did pretty well. We were getting at least 40% of those positive outcomes, which in comparison with some of the government main projects and work programs was much more successful. That was because we really focused on the needs of our clients. We reckoned we only ever had one chance, because if people who had been unemployed, and many of them for several years, had quite complex health conditions, a lot of them had then gone on to get very depressed, very isolated. They were quite poor. If they were putting their heads up above the parapet to say, I'd like to have another go at getting back to work, we weren't going to mess them about. We knew that these were people who were being enormously brave, huge motivation, huge determination, and they needed careful nurturing. So we weren't going to throw them into a classroom with a bundle of other people and just treat them like, a group. We took a lot of care to have one-to-one meetings with them, often in their own homes where they felt safe and comfortable. We looked after them. We made all the adjustments that helped them to participate. We didn't push them on time. They could progress at their own pace, but they got regular contact. Probably about once a fortnight, somebody would be in touch and say, how's it going? Do you need some more help? What can we do next? What would you like to do next? You're the driver. How would you like to approach your business? Because business advice is not a black art. It's very straightforward.
Right.
But what you need to do is actually break it down into manageable chunks for people who might just take a bit longer because they've got other things going on in their lives. They're coping with a health condition. They're coping with their family commitments. They're coping with all the financial pressures that they're in. So that went on very well. And then after a while, I decided that I needed to find a new way of changing employers' attitudes. So I've always cooked ever since I was a child, really. So I thought, well, baking blind has got a bit of a ring to it, and it's a bit of a pun on me being a blind person. So I started doing some videos with one of my brothers. And we pushed out some videos, and they were horribly, horribly amateur. I mean, just, I'm not embarrassed about them, but I'm a bit. And then I got to
live and learn.
Yes, absolutely. Then I got this email from a place in San Francisco called the Lighthouse. And they said, would you like to win $25,000? And as you can imagine, it took me quite a long time to debate on this. And was it a scam? Because of course, whoever offers you that sort of thing. Anyway, I decided it wasn't a scam. They'd found out about me because they'd been clearly researching blind people on the internet and come across Baking Blind. And this was a prize by the Lighthouse organization for blind people with ambition. Well, you can see and hear, I think, that I'm not a shrinking violet, and I am quite ambitious. So eventually I went through all the process of putting forward a project idea, doing Zoom interviews with them, and eventually I won one of the prizes. I think there were about, well over 200 applicants from 27 countries. And I was lucky enough to be one of the winners. Ojok, who sadly has died since then, was from Uganda, and he was teaching other blind people to have bees so they could become more financially independent. And Ahmet lived in San Francisco, but was going to kayak across the Bosphorus. Anyway, mine was Baking Blind, and I was going to travel around the world cooking with professional chefs and home cooks, some sighted, some not, over about 3 months, and make videos, write the book, and change the world. I regret to say I failed on changing the world, but I did the rest. And this was back in 2017. And then I went over to Europe, over to France, to do some more cooking, because by then I'd done San Francisco in California, Costa Rica in South America. I'd done Norfolk, Virginia, Virginia Beach. I'd done Chongqing in China, which is the world's biggest city. I've got a population of 37 million. I went to Australia and I cooked in Kiama and Sydney and Melbourne, and went through Perth, and then I was off to through South Africa, and I was up in Malawi, where I was cooking in the capital at one of the most extraordinary hotels I've ever been in. And then I was cooking in the villages where they actually cook over open fires. I'm meeting the albino group there. And I've been cooking with blind people throughout this journey, but also, as I said, lots of professional chefs, some of them really top 1-star experienced chefs. Fabulous. Anyway, then I was over in France and I was involved in a major motor car accident, and I had a C2 fracture. So I was in intensive care for 2 months, in a coma for 6 weeks, and then in a rehabilitation hospital in France for all of that. And they couldn't surgically repair my neck. And there was a real risk that 1, I would die, or 2, I would end up not being able to move below the neck. But I survived. They put me in a fiberglass neck brace. It was like that. I can't, you may not be able to see, well, you might see this, but it was like that. So I couldn't really talk, but it, it kept me like that. So I want you to imagine me in France, blind, not able to talk. They spoke French, and in the end, the only way I could communicate with them was to ask them for a pen. And I don't know what your schoolboy French is like, but I could only remember la plume de ma tante, which is basically like asking for a quill pen. So I was writing, and I haven't seen my writing for 20 years. So there is me writing messages to the French nurses and doctors in English on this scrappy piece of paper, and expecting them to understand it. Anyway, they were fabulous, just outstanding medical care. I mean, stunning. And eventually I was able to walk again, and I literally had to learn how to sit up in a chair. My bed turned into a massive, great big chair. Then I had to learn how to stand, then to walk, and that was awful. If you're blind, the last thing you need is an electric wheelchair with a little steering thing that you have to use, and you run into walls. It was hilarious.
I bet.
And then I had to learn how to climb stairs. And eventually, after more than 5 months, I returned to the UK. And life was a long journey of recovery. And I am still doing it. And I am still learning how to walk properly, because although I can walk, I'm not doing it very well. And so that's setting up all sorts of other problems in my body. I had a long period where, I had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, whatever it's called. And so I had to have neuropsychology, psychology, psychiatry. Oh my goodness, anything they could throw at me. And it is, and there was a legal case too. And in fact, there was another one going on at the same time. So you can imagine coping with all of this.
Oh my goodness.
Was utter misery. But there is good news. I did manage to get married, which was fabulous. And so we're extraordinarily happy. He moved from his home in France at the beginning of the pandemic, because we've been spending a month in the UK and a month in France since I'd returned. We got married, we settled in the UK, and we're as happy as Larry. And with the COVID pandemic, I started doing more videos of me cooking, where we had other people taking part in the cooking sessions. They were all doing it on Zoom because nobody could meet up.
Right.
And so I've been doing that for about 2 years now. I finished the book, published the book, and I've started on my second one. So, and literally just today, the Talking Newspaper Federation for the UK have asked me to do a series of, I don't know whether you'd call them podcasts, interviews, speaking pieces of cooking for other disabled people that'll go out on their Talking Newspaper service. So there are always new things to do out there, new challenges, new successes to be had, new fun, new people to meet, like you two today.
Oh, yes. That is exactly what we, want to do, is not only show people like you have a lot to give and a lot of experiences they can have. They don't need to just be stuck somewhere or shoved somewhere, and told to be quiet, be loud and make a scene,
I think you've got me completely wrong. How could you possibly think that I'm loud?
I have no idea where that came from.
Of course I have.
So we really appreciate you sharing all that. And oh my goodness, the things that we could discuss. But where do you want to start, Mark?
Well, I was thinking while you were talking, doing my best not to interrupt, because I can do that. You mentioned that these government-run disability employment programs generally don't work or aren't as effective as what you were able to do and get going. And you touched on it a bit, and I was wondering if you could expand on it or talk about that a bit more. It seems that you were much more caring and compassionate and empathetic to what people were going through whereas the government was just like, okay, stand in this line, fill out a form, and follow this procedure, and it's all very disconnected from who you are as a person.
Right.
I think I don't want to completely criticize government efforts. They
Right.
are trying to do things, and I have been involved with some of them. And at one stage, I was working for our Department for Work and Pensions around benefits and things. But I think it's, I suspect actually it's mainly old-fashioned thinking. And there are all sorts of pressures on them they have this concept of plucking the lowest hanging fruit, i.e. taking the easiest people to get back to work, and putting actually a degree of pressure on them to do so. I think that is not always the most successful way to make inroads. And I'm taking that sort of thinking from attitudes towards recovery from major health conditions. And I was listening to a very interesting professor, I think she's at Aberdeen University, who has written something called the Stroke Workbook. And it's a much more psychologically based approach to the whole scope of recovery. And it's about what happens in your head when you are facing a major setback. And if your head is not motivated, confident, but is depressed, in low mood, all the rest of it, your chances of making that recovery, or making that, you may not recover, but making progress in life is much more constrained. And as I heard her talk, I thought, that's exactly right for many, many of the clients I have met. If their head is not in the right place, and they are overwhelmed with processes, procedures, paperwork, everything is done group, it's not tailored for them, their chances of success are much lower. That is my perception. I can't give you, a fabulous data-based analysis of it. I haven't done scientific research, but I am trying now to use the evaluation of the projects I've done, which do have data, and draw some conclusions from them. I don't think I can say that this is scientific, but it is well-founded, I think. What do you think? Do you recognize anything that I'm saying?
Oh, goodness. We talk about that so much. Like,
Yes.
we obviously have a lot of guests and hear a lot of stories, and it's very evident, not only dealing with this stuff myself, but talking to other people, that the systems are so broken. And as you allude to clearly, that it's a system that's old, and the perceptions of what needed to be done as in the past is not anywhere near what it needs to be today. And they need to revamp a lot of things.
I think they're just old-fashioned, and they're old-fashioned because nobody has really explained to them that actually you can have much more success doing it in a different way. I think also, when you look at interventions, I don't know what it's like on your side of the pond, you've got big organizations that are taking a lot of money out of their funding for chief executives, finance directors, public relations directors, whole pyramids of people, when actually the most important one is right at the very bottom, because those are the people who have the interaction with the clients. And if you get the right people there, you get them well motivated, you don't overwhelm them, huge caseloads, you allow them to work one-to-one with clients in a patient and caring way, empathetic, holistic, you are going to get much better outcomes.
Correct. Yeah.
And, you know, I think we have to acknowledge that back to work provision all over the world is an industry now. You know, it's a commercial activity. And yes, things do need to be commercial because they need to be viable, but they shouldn't be. For me, I tried to keep my income when I was doing all this work at about the national average income, because I didn't think it was right for me to make money out of other people's misery.
Right.
You know, that was a major ethos for me.
And like how, I guess, the way we've experienced it here is a lot of these charities and big corporations and maybe even governments, well, definitely even governments, they're the bulk of their money and resources gets put into their own survival, right? As opposed to who they actually claim to be helping or who they should be helping.
Right.
I think I'm just going to throw something back at you slightly, because if you're a government agency, for the sake of argument, and you have got in this country, and I'm sure in yours, 20% of the population, 1 in 5 people have a disability. Of those, 50% are not working. Some of those will be beyond retirement age, but you've still got a huge number of people. And to tackle that huge number of people, you need a lot of resources. And I'm talking about people, not cash. And you've got to have ways of managing them. And if you have, you know, I'm talking about the projects I did. These were small projects covering, you know, relatively small, but very high deprivation areas. If you've got a government agency that is trying to cover projects like that and manage them, and they do have to manage them, in every location across the country, it becomes a contractual nightmare, because you've got to watch that they're doing things properly, they're working within their financial limits, they're treating the customers properly, there's all sorts of governance, legal stuff, all the rest of it. So you can easily see that little projects all over the place are a control problem for any government, any major agency. So how do you find a way of doing that so you can maintain the idea of localism, of something that is comfortable for the people, but also run it efficiently? And governments have to be cost effective. They have to watch the bottom line. So I'm not saying they're all wrong, and they're certainly not all right, but there is a balance to be had about how you manage this. I was lucky with the contracts that I was doing. They were run by local councils, and so they're covering a fairly decent area, but not a huge area. You know, 70, I can't remember how big they were, say 100,000 people. So local councils were a very good avenue to do this through, because they had their own finance people there. They had their own project, you know, management people there. So that worked really well because we could be a small project plugged into a reasonably good, well-organized organization. They could monitor us personally and see how things were going. But that doesn't always work when you've got big policies that you're trying to drive out. I'm not necessarily trying to defend, but I'm also trying to understand that life is quite complex, and big contracts can be a very easy option if you're trying to get quick results. But it's really whether you get the results that you want.
I think it's there are definitely corporations and companies that very obviously want to do the right thing with the finances they have and helping people, across the board. But I do think that it needs to come from a mental and emotional standpoint from the top, and getting them to understand what kind of things are, morally and ethically okay to do on a human level, and what kind of things are about helping people and not just about money and getting things from it. And I think once that is understood from the top, is going to obviously trickle down to the resources that the people underneath them or have the availability to give the people they're trying to work with and do things for.
I think your key words there were about it being at the human level. Mm-hmm. And when you have one or often multiple disabilities, you needed to be treated at that human level, certainly in the initial phases, because you are coping with the associated mental health conditions, the depression, the just lack of confidence. And if somebody does not recognize that right from the start, you're going nowhere. You just don't have any chance.
Right past it.
Yeah, I was literally today, not in advance of this, but just I'm writing this book, as I said, and reading some of the case studies of the clients we helped. And we're talking about people who've been out of work for 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, and were really highly motivated to work. Can you imagine after 10 years, putting your hand up and say, yeah, I'd like to start my own business? What courage does that take? Just enormous. And yet nobody had actually tapped into that courage for that man for all those years. And it's sort of a system failure, isn't it? That we don't have a way of looking at that as him as a human being, recognizing that he is still determined to overcome the challenges he faces, and giving him literally a helping hand. It is that hand that you put out at a human level that interacts with him, and he can put his hand around yours, feel that strength, feel that companionship. We are in this together. And for me, that is the magic difference.
Yeah, you talked about when you were, helping the people get their jobs in the disability community and giving them that, holding their hand, giving them that support they need to achieve what they want to achieve, but maybe they need a little bit more help. So, it's things like that. And you're a good testament to be able to show people how to do things, to achieve things like that,
Well, I hope so. But also I'm looking at it because I've had a lot of roles across government. I'm
Right.
also looking at it from a pan-government perspective,
Mhm.
because it's very easy for one part of government, and completely understandably, people do their best, but it's very easy for one part of government to not recognize the impact that they have on another part of government.
Mhm.
So just as a really simple one, if you can't get the health treatment that you need in a reasonable time to get you as well as you can be, I'm not asking for a miracle cure, but just as well as you can be.
Right.
And so therefore you can't work. Therefore, you're suddenly becoming a cost to the taxpayer for the benefits that you're going to receive. You're also then going to be more of a cost to the health sector, because your health is almost certainly going to decline because you're not working, because of all the emotional stuff that goes on. Then there's going to be other costs. So in the UK, for example, and I bet it's very similar in America, the fact that you have a disability is the prime reason for a large number of suicides.
Mhm.
So if you looked across all the suicide data, disability is the most significant factor behind it, and particularly among men, particularly in their 40s. If you look at mental health conditions, or perceptions of life, disabled people feel loneliness. Most loneliness are the most unhappy. There's all sorts of things like that. So can you see you've got this cycle of medical condition, not, if you're not as well as you can be to get back to work, then it sort of starts going into a circle of all sorts of problems. Disabled people are far likelier to be in social housing. That's cheap housing isn't the right word, but it's where it's sort of subsidized housing in this country. Or they're most likely to be in areas of deprivation, and those may be multiple deprivation around education. Disabled people in this country are going to have lower academic qualifications than their peers. And that doesn't mean they've been disabled as a child and not been able to participate in the education system. It almost certainly means that the education system in the area where they grew up wasn't very good. They didn't get all the academic qualifications or vocational qualifications that perhaps they could. And so therefore they go into jobs that perhaps have higher risk of injury, ill health, and they have less good lifestyles. And so therefore they become disabled, and you get all these circles within circles going on.
Mhm. As I said, it starts from the top. When it's not emotionally and mentally thought about cause and effect,
Yes.
from the beginning of someone's life, it's a circle and it's hard to get out of.
Yes, and deprivation is a major cause of it, and that may be all sorts of reasons. It may be, with the mining, and industry has closed down. It may be that the economy has gone through a down cycle. It may be, you've had a pandemic, and I think we're all looking at what are going to be the consequences of the pandemic on the young people's, the children's ability to get the qualifications they need to move on in life and avoid this sort of cycle of not a very happy life, actually. And we have to do our very best to improve their lives. But do you want me to talk about something more happy now? Gosh, that was very grim.
What else do you have?
What else can I talk about? Well, I'm a blind person, but before I lost my sight, I was a great painter. So I did a lot of watercolors, a lot of drawing, lots of embroidery, lots of upholstery, made all the cushions, the sofa covers, the curtains all over this house that I'm living
Wow.
in now. So did all of that. And then, of course, you can't really do much of that when you can't see. So I've developed new things to do. I'd also always done ceramics. So I still sometimes do ceramics. So I'm doing sculptures and things like that. I found pewter. So I can make tiny models. And this is only because I'm being cheap and pewter's costly. I can make tiny models. I did little Christmas crackers. I did little stacks of parcels. If you can't see, I'm modeling them with my fingers, which means nothing to anyone but me. Stacks of parcels all wrapped up with ribbon. And then I made molds out of them, out of rubber. And then I took them onto my pewter master craftsman person, because she's a woman. And she cast them in pewter. And then I did all the finishing off, because you had to get off all the little whiskers of pewter into the polishing machine. And they all went on the top of little tiny Christmas cakes that I made for Christmas presents. And I make bowls. So a bowl, you get a little disc of pewter. Well, it could be a bigger disc actually. And you literally take a hammer to it and beat it into a bowl. So I do things like that. I do lots of flower arranging. And actually, I'm not bad at flower arranging. I prefer flowers I can smell, like fragrant lilies or the hyacinths and the daffodils and the narcissi that we get at this time of year. So I do lots of quite big, dramatic, flamboyant flower arrangements. What else do I do? I suppose I do building design.
Wow.
So we're sitting in my atrium here, which I designed. I have my architect and I say, this is exactly what I want. And he draws it up for me. And actually, he made me a model of it out of a cornflake packet so I could check his work. And so I've got 3 extensions here that I designed, right down to where the plug sockets go on the wall. And I knew what I wanted to go where. So I do all that sort of thing. I designed the garden here. And I've got lots of, I suppose you'd call it tactile paving, but it's just paving slabs, but with a raised little tiny brick between them. So I can walk around the garden like a tightrope walker on this narrow track, and I can find my way around. So those are much happier things. In the garden, I've got 2 big water features. So even though I can't actually see the garden, I can hear it. And then I've got tubs of herbs that I can go and pick. I've got wonderful apple trees that I preserve and dry and bottle and eat. So growing things is a real pleasure too.
Yeah.
So there is masses of things to do.
I love to grow things. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to ask you talked a bit about your second book that you're working on now. What was your first book about? Was that about blind baking?
Oh, thank you, Mark, for the opportunity to plug the book. Available on Amazon and on Kindle. And it's actually quite good spacing, quite good print for people with some low vision. But that is the story of my baking blind adventure around the world. So it starts off with me winning the prize and going to all the different places. And there's quotes from all the people I met, all the recipes, which are really easy to do. Apart from the Chinese ones, quite difficult to get some of the ingredients, and the ones in Malawi. But there's all the ingredients and the recipes. And then there's the story of the accident and my recovery. And what I've tried to weave through that is some of the things I've learned about living with a disability, particularly blindness. And I met a lot of other blind people around the world. So there's some of their stories too, like the albino group in Malawi. In that country and in other parts of Africa, if you're albino, you stand out because you are white, and literally white, very pale. And you have, in contrast with people with dark skin, you are very obvious. And they call them ghosts or spirits. And they have, a lot of them have visual impairments because they've lost pigmentation in their eyes. I don't understand all the medical bits, but a lot of them have very low vision or really not much usable vision at all. They have a job getting employment. They can be very ostracized from their villages in some of the more rural areas. Some of them are actually killed because of their albinism. And even then, their bodies are dug up and their bones are extracted and sold for black magic elsewhere.
Wow.
Yeah, and these were the stories that they were telling me not many years ago. So, you know,
You mentioned that you are in contact with a lot of people around the world, obviously. And how are you familiar with any what's his name? John Bramlett here in Texas. He's a blind painter.
I don't know him.
We
I
will
would
have
have
to get your contact to him. I think y'all would really appreciate each other's experiences.
Yeah, it would be lovely to.
Especially since you've done painting and enjoyed doing that.
Mhm. Yes, that's what made me think about it.
I have no vision at all. So for me, you know, everybody thinks that as soon as you've got no vision at all, which is only about 3% of visually impaired people, that you live in this black blind world. It's not like that at all. I live in constant early summer sunshine. So even when it's dark, and it might be dark outside here, I have no idea. I am living in that sort of light, pale yellow, warm but not hot sunshine.
Oh,
And that's what I see. I don't know whether this visually impaired painter can see at all. He may be
I don't
using
think
tactile
he
paint.
can.
no.
He paints by feel.
Yes.
He
I
just
don't think that was good enough.
studio.
Pardon?
He just opened a studio in a bar.
Yes.
Yeah, so with all of his paintings. So we will be excited in the future to go visit that. And
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I think I've gone three-dimensional. I always wanted to be an architect, and I think three-dimensional is even better for me.
That's nice. Anything else, Crystal?
I can't think of anything else. You did a wonderful job of, sharing a lot of experiences, and you've had your hands in a lot of things, and it's so awesome to hear you talk. I don't really need to say anything.
May I say one last thing?
Sure.
People might like to go onto my website, which is www.pennymelvillebrown.com. And on the website, I have tried to make it accessible. So there's lots of my recipes there, which there are lots of my recipes on the website that people can download. And I think they are just Word documents, so they can make them any shape, size, or whatever works for them. And for lots of those recipes, there are links to my YouTube channel. And as I said, there are a couple of 100 videos on there. And you might think it sounds really peculiar for blind people to have videos. Think of them more like podcasts with pictures, because of course I had to take a major part in editing them. So I had to understand what was going on. So it's all audio, all me, just me talking, of course. And you're probably sick to death of me talking now, so I'll stop.
No, I can hear you talk all day. I love your accent. I love your stories and just the way you hold, talk about things and explain things. I love it.
You
Yeah.
are very kind, the pair of you. And thank you so much
We were,
for taking
we
the
were
interest
just
in me.
you were just enthralled rewatching the pre-interview
Yes.
and just being reminded of Mrs. Potts from Beauty and the Beast.
I was like, Mark, close your eyes and just listen to her talk and imagine her being a teapot.
You've seen Beauty and the Beast, right?
No, I'm a blind person.
Well, I mean, listen to it.
Listen to
No, I'm too old for
but
that.
the teapot in Beauty and the Beast is played by Angela Lansbury.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes. So, although you don't sound exactly the same, it's similar.
the same kindness and explaining and gentleness of, it was close. So I was like, Mark, you gotta stop and do this.
But do you encourage people to reach out to you, maybe if they're going through their own disability journey? Do you encourage them to reach out to you?
I'm always happy to talk to email. Email is good for me. Things like messages or whatever on social media are no good to me. I do blog and I do use social media, but I can only do that with assistance. So for me, email is by far the best way of communicating with me. But again, people can follow me on social media. I don't know what you do with Facebook. I confess I've given up Twitter because I thought it was just getting so out of hand. But I blog nearly every week. I blog nearly every week, and I use Facebook. And I also post on to other Facebook groups and things like that if they might be interested in me.
Yes.
So,
well, thank you. That's helpful for our audience listening and watching.
Yes.
So you can know, if they're interested in stuff that they heard you speak about today, they can go find you. And
I think they should say where they heard about me, because that will help me to understand the contact.
Right. Well, we really appreciate you being here.
Yes, definitely.
It's been a delight. And can I wish you two every good luck, good fortune, and huge success with what you're doing? Because, we need these sorts of initiatives all over the place.
For sure.
I hope that you grow and grow and grow.
Thank you.
Thanks for saying that, Penny. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye from the UK.
Okay.